and I'm calling out, light the fire again.
What's happening with our primary school kids, what's happening with our high school kids, and how do we be the kind of people to reach them? I was posed with these 3 questions in preparation for this talk, and in my interactions with parents and children, it doesn't take too long before the following is heard. What's with kids today? They're different and they behave differently. When I was their age, and you can fill in the blanks. Thank you for having me this morning, and I really hope that our time together adds value and perhaps poses some questions and brings some clarity, challenges you, but all in all, I hope adds value for the time that you've invested this morning. So the reality is, they are different. And that I feel this is largely due to the fact that they're growing up in a vastly different world to the ones that we can remember, to the ones that we actually grew up in. And some might say, but really? Isn't that just an excuse? Aren't they very similar to us? And perhaps our expectations are too low. Their responsibilities are too few. And they haven't had to struggle and learn like we did. Aren't they lazier? Too protected, too coddled. Perhaps their lives are too easy. As a father of 4 very unique children, each with different birth stories, different giftings and challenges, and as someone who spends most of his week engaged with supporting kids in schools and in private practice, I feel I agree with the concerns over behavior, and I disagree. The challenge is that while I might agree with some of the conclusions at times regarding behavior, the one thing that I know is that their environment, their support systems, the state of the world, their levels of stress in their homes, and the magnitude of effects of the rates of broken families, divorce, financial difficulty, fear for now and the future, disconnection between parents and desperation, mental health challenges, COVID effects that are still lingering, and uncertainty, generally speaking, are markedly different and worse than when I was definitely their age. Remembering that kids are sponges and that they are mirrors. They're absorbing their environment and they're also reflecting their environment. And so I would argue that their behavior, the one that we see, is primarily in response to their world. My wife and I were youth pastors around about 15 years ago, and I think we did a pretty good job. We had decent numbers. Kids had fun, we had lights, we had music, we had nice worship, we had games, we had prayer nights, we had salvations, we had commitments, we had life groups, and I think we had solid teachings. But looking back now, the level of success can only really be attributed to God showing up in their lives, and whether they were supported by loving, connected, safe homes and families. The fact that we prioritized connecting with the kids, the entertainment, that was big, that we prioritized connection. The entertainment value did very little beyond the time that they spent with us. And entertainment might be nice in the moment, but the long helpful, beneficial effects are short-lived. I think entertainment will always come a distant second to a loving, engaged, pursuing, passionate, connected relationship. But I fear entertainment is at times all some of our kids have. Their true supporting relationships have endured great loss. And so it's the entertainment that actually influences them more. Whatever that entertainment might be, and I'm not just saying simply on a screen, I'm talking about general content or general experiences that are not really directed towards their long-term growth and benefit. And that's why I think much of the behavior we see today, we struggle to stomach. The good news is that connected relationships will always reign supreme. The challenge is getting people in their spaces to prioritize them, the young people, not the to-do list, not the obligations, not the function, but the person. And we need to do this in a world that often seeks to distract. I fully believe we can reverse the things that concern us, but it will come at a cost. And that cost will differ from person to person, from home to home, from church to church, and obviously from ministry to ministry. I really think that God's love is quite simple. The first scripture that I can remember learning was as a newly minted believer, was the stalwart John 3:16. For God so loved the world that whoever believed in him would not die, but they'd have eternal life. And then we see in Romans 5 verses 8 where Paul's talking and writing, and he says, God showed us his love for us in this, that while we were still sinners, while we were still absent, while we were still separate from him, while we were still apart from him, he died for us. Simple. I feel another challenge is that we are living in a world of conflicting messages, often aimed at complex issues, politicized at times, position-based at other times, perhaps filled with ulterior motives. But in all the noise our young ones are exposed to, simple messages like the ones I just mentioned, they often get muddled or distorted, maybe even lost completely. The power of influence and connection will allow the simple, most important messages to be heard and understood. The challenge is in an environment of disconnection, those simple, most important messages can often be lost. So I thought, in looking at how do we serve these two groups of people, I'd ask some questions. And then look at some ways that I think would be beneficial in supporting them. So I think the first thing we need to ask is, what is influencing their world? Often, even though the influence of parents and family and school is still a massive factor and should be a large factor, kids have conflicting voices, and they're exposed to many of these daily. The influx of devices linking our kids to online content and in a virtual world has actually become mind-numbing. And just on a separate angle, often parents ask, when's a good time for screens and social media? And I would just like to put it out there that when it comes to our teens, a phone in the hand, to be used as a phone, probably not before 13. And social media, probably not before 16 or 17. And if you can wait longer, that's even better. But it can be hard, I know that. My reasons are that tech is positioned to use our psychology against us, to become a hook that we struggle to navigate. And with kids who are still developing, they are even more at risk, and they're hooked even more. The content can be problematic, and while we are or can be quite certain of the influences we allow into our homes, as soon as there's a device in their hand, we lose much of the ability to filter out what they're exposed to. I can stop. I can be the gatekeeper of my house. physically. But with the advent of technology, it's becoming harder and harder to be the gatekeeper of their minds behind closed doors and in the safety of their bedrooms. I've met kids who have had screen times of longer than 70 hours a week. And whatever they watched, even if it was healthy content, if you can have that, you have to agree that this is a huge amount of time focused on some form of entertainment, where someone gets to speak into that child's life without any consequences. And this is happening at a very vulnerable time and in a world where uncertainty and confusion often reigns. So we have the screens, we have always on access, we have the games that cannot pause, we have social media access, which, let's face it, is not sufficiently filtered or healthy or developmentally appropriate most of the time. I'd say primary school and high school kids are influenced most by the device in their hands. And the challenge is, and it's a scary picture when you think about it, this is the first generation that was actually born with a device in their hands. And if you think about that, that should create some discomfort. The challenge is, and the challenge comes also where other kids who have more access than the kids who are in your charge. And then they receive access to other kids. And so the circle keeps going around. So I think one of the things that's very important in this space is when looking at who's influencing our kids, is to have some sort of agreement as groups, as ministries, as parents groups, as communities, when it comes to device use, of, hey, this is what we agree on as a group. Hey, this is what we're going to agree on. Are we all in agreement? Because then it helps with obviously the content and the time, but also it helps bypass feelings of I'm the bad one, I'm the odd one out. When we can agree in groups of community what we will be having our kids exposed to or using, it can be quite helpful. So agreement in groups, in ministries, with parents can be quite helpful. It was said, and it's quite scary, that your child is only as safe as the least safe child in their group. And you might have everything in place for your child, influences and all the rest of it, but your child is only as safe as the child who has got the least supports, the least scaffolding, the least protection. Our kids are also at risk of, or because their behavior is not simply their choices. And I think we need to understand this, and we'll touch on it a bit more later as well. There are huge commercial reasons why companies would want our kids' attention and one day their money. And this is not conspiracy theory, this makes sense. There will be backrooms, there will be marketing departments, there will be adults paid and incentivized to figure out ways to hold your child's attention. Ours as well, but our child's. So it's not a fair fight. And perhaps this means that we need to offer some grace. That when you see a child, your child, fixed on a device, fixed on a screen, fixed on content that's just like pouring into them, it perhaps is not so much of a choice as it is a targeted plan to hook them, which might require some grace from us. What did Jesus do with his disciples, with his apprentices? I would argue that one of his most powerful tools was his witness factor. We read of his personal interactions, not just in the big moments, but along the way, along the journey from town to town, the kilometers that must have been involved in. And I imagine in real life, the disciples would have had access to amazing conversations as they walked these long distances together and with him. And it was his connection, his mentorship, his discipleship that created the foundation on which their ministries could grow and weather the storm. So this word connection for me is fundamental. As much as our worlds can be chaotic and stressful, and look, they absolutely can be. We need to embrace this idea of witness with our kids, or those that we are leading, and not just for the big teaching moments. I think it's fundamental that we can download and understand and appreciate the value, the benefit of witness and connection with the people that we are leading or trying to reach. And how do we work that out? That'll be very, very important. The next question, so what's influencing them, is next question I think is, who are they looking to? With my interactions with primary school kids especially, and many teens still, although it might look different, they are looking towards important people in their lives to guide and influence them, which is great, which is wonderful. There does come a challenge though, where when those around them are too preoccupied, that they become more peer attached, and their parents' voices become, or their peers' voices become more powerful at younger ages. And the reality is these young voices are not able to manage the weight of this responsibility when our kids become more peer attached versus more adult attached. And I find that is creating challenges. And for younger kids, especially who went through COVID at developmentally important times of their lives, some you're seeing behavior challenges and difficulties based on the fact that they have connected more with their peers based on how we structured things during that times. Perhaps in the past it was just expected that young people would look up to older ones, that they would follow the first commandment with a blessing, that they would honor their mothers and fathers. But the voices and direction bombarding kids is coming in fast and free and often unfiltered. For our voices to matter most, for us to be their greatest influence, or the greatest influence, we need to be the ones who are relationally connected, seen, and felt to be present and intentionally interested. Connection is key. Connection is so, so important. I think that's important when we're looking at who are they looking to. The third one is, what challenges are they navigating? So I think they're navigating many of the same challenges we navigated, relationships, the future, school, work, sport. There's a lot of things that they are navigating that we had to navigate. So there are a lot of similar things. But there seems to be a huge change in terms of the anxious environment in which they are navigating similar things. Their future, their reality, the world around them is creating a lot of anxiety. And looking at kids who are a lot more anxious. The words like anxiety and depression were not really something that I can remember when I was at that age dealing with my peers and that, but they seem to become synonymous nowadays with this age group. And there's a recent book that's come out called The Anxious Generation, and it speaks directly to this and how this generation is dealing with this and navigating perhaps some of the similar things that we had, but in a very dissimilar environment. And we're navigating a world that leaves us feeling very unsettled at times. And not only, by us I mean us, the adults, and not only does this affect on us trickle down to the kids around us, but they are also experiencing it in their own way, and remembering that they have less tools than we have. And I think one of the things that often gets overlooked is when we as adults are struggling through difficult times, we often have a lot of choices and hopefully a lot more tools, and we can opt out and we can press pause on life, maybe, or we can choose to do certain things. Sometimes we don't choose, but we often have tools and options at our disposal. And I find sometimes that young people going through their own anxiety, experiencing the effects of our anxiety on them, it's almost as if they're just expected to roll with the punches with less ability than we actually have. And I think we need to look at that, and that's perhaps a bit unfair. So they are kids and teenagers, yes, like we were, those that came before them as well. But they're existing in this almost pseudo-connected environment, in this world where they have relationships that are often not able to support them in the way that they need. relationships that are often too busy navigating their own stuff or stresses, leaving them with a sense of isolation and needing to go it alone. Comparison culture, bullying, an always-on existence. One MIT professor described this generation as this forever elsewhere generation. Not only are they navigating the world's pressures, financial crises, because we do experience them and that trickles down onto them, so they're navigating it. They're navigating potential wars and displacement of people groups. But what they have now is access to the live streaming of these events. And the effects of secondary trauma are real. They're experiencing it on a daily basis through how they're experiencing us, but also through what they're experiencing online and in the virtual world. And those effects are very, very real. And their exposure to these things will affect their need to self-soothe, to medicate, and to numb. This is our opportunity to connect and meet needs and provide answers and support. But often, when these things are coming into them, because we are so disconnected and we feel so anxious and overwhelmed, many kids are left to their own devices, literally and figuratively, need to figure out how to self-soothe and who to speak into. And it's at those moments where they are very vulnerable. So in those moments, we have an opportunity to meet their need, to provide connection and support. And also the breakdown of families, lacking connection, families that are together, are posing more and more challenges. And I see that more and more with kids. They're not going home to an environment that is supportive, that can buffer what the world is offering, especially in a world that is always on. The next question I think we need to ask is, how safe are they? We often spend our lives looking at our kids' physical safety, and so we must. We need to keep them physically safe. But I wonder if we have become complacent. Because the truth is, I think they are safe outside because they seldom go outside. But much of their lives are spent virtually. And that existence can be harder to navigate and influence. I think when it comes to safety, there are two really big challenges that I think we need to look at. And the first one is virtual safety and the effects of life and what's going on a child's and teens' mental health. It is something sadly true that the amount of kids presenting with anxiety and depression or similar symptoms has grown hugely in the last 15 years. And obviously it was influenced by COVID, but it is interesting when we go back in the last 15 years and we look at the influx of technology, specifically handheld devices, and we start looking at graphs of anxiety, graphs of depression, graphs of incidences of self-harm. There's a massive uptick round about 2007, 8, 9, and 10 especially. And when you start to think of things like the influence of the phone, the influence of that handheld device, the influence to have connection to an online world wherever you are, sort of started around about 2007. 2010 is when the front-facing camera was put in the iPhone, and how that's affected social media. And we can't disconnect our young people's mental health challenges and uptick from the increase in technology. I think research is very clear on that. So it's also hugely influenced from a family structure perspective. The more parents in the family are the more the parents in the family are struggling, the more the kids struggle, and then those kids go into life and into school, and then they struggle more, and obviously that brings the parents into it, who are also dealing with their own stuff, and this self-fulfilling the cycle, it's this feedback loop gets created, and so they're struggling, kids are struggling, parents are struggling, and it just goes round and round. So This feedback loop is quite difficult. Disconnection, isolation, invalidation, comparison. This always on culture, always contactable, is leaving our kids often unable to ever truly come home, and to calm, and to turn off, and to process. When they are home, then, if they can turn off, they experience environments possibly that are stressful at times. And then perhaps because they don't have the support structures, they turn to devices to help numb. They turn to online social lives to help them feel something. And so the cycle continues. And I think another challenge will be coming with the advent of AI. One of the challenges there, I think, is not knowing what and who to trust. This can lead to confusion and anxiety, and even more so when reaching young people who are now being bombarded with more truth. And the importance of connection and relationship as a foundation on Jesus being truth. I am the way, the truth, and the life. But now we also have them in an environment that is very able to manufacture things that look like truth. So we have to have these things in our mind and at the forefront, and be aware of the effects of tech and devices and their virtual life. Are they safe? Our kids are physically very safe in reality, but who are we allowing into their rooms? Would we allow the same people into our houses that we are allowing into their rooms via their games, via their online activity, whatever the case may be? And I'm not suggesting we need to clamp down on everything, but I think we do need to be aware, and we need to perhaps ask some questions of ourselves and put certain things in place. But often in an environment where we can connect with the child, where our relationship is strong, these things become much easier to roll out. So on the back of those questions, on the back of that reality, and perhaps what they're going through, how do we be the kind of people to reach them? And that's really the big question. How do we reach them when we've got all these things, when we're looking at who's influencing, whose voices are they hearing, are they safe? Questions like that. How do we reach them? If they are so unique, what do we do? What do we do to support them? And I think 4 areas I believe are important, maybe even fundamental, that we start focusing on these 4 areas when it comes to young people. And those 4 areas are helping them unpack or understand their identity. The second one is excuse me. The second one is really experiencing and understanding grace. And the third one is helping them make sense of their purpose. And the last one, I think, is for us to really get a handle on influence. How do we influence them? So we've got identity, we've got grace, we've got purpose, and we've got influence. So let's look at those 4. So identity, when we're looking at guiding, supporting stable and supportive leadership, they're hearing many messages, and often contrary, and at times more focused on a narrative that is sought than truth and compassion and love. And when we look at young people, and especially teenagers, identity formation is a challenging period. You've gotten to a period of development where you are cognitively and developmentally able to ask some more challenging questions. You're able to handle questions that before that time you actually developmentally actually couldn't handle. And so now you're arriving at this world with this new brain that's able to unpack and process complex and often contrary realities. So identity formation is challenging. You're trying to figure out, who am I? Where do I belong in this world? That's normal. It happened to me. It happened to you. And especially with our teams. So it's normal development. So helping them journey through a period of establishing identity has always been important. Nowadays, instead of having very narrow descriptors of what they should be, which perhaps has been the case in the past, and perhaps which is something I believe has contributed to some of the challenges today, because we've been very narrow in terms of this is what this looks like and this is what that looks like. And perhaps that's created some of the challenges we have today. But today we have almost no descriptors. Anything comes, anything goes, and confusion and doubt are given a wide berth. So instead of helping our kids navigate a normal, developmentally appropriate period of identity, we're actually not wanting to go there. We're not wanting to support them. And perhaps the pendulum is swung very far to the one side. And depending on who you are and where you come from, you're going to navigate this differently. But they do need help. They do need support in these spaces. And just to be left to navigate this very difficult, confusing time, to be left to navigate it on their own, I don't think is fair. Now, when it comes to identity, I'm not specifically talking about the phrase, I identify as ... I'm talking about, who am I? Who am I called to be? What am I called to do? What have I been made to do? And besides good works, we need to be a people to sit with our young people in the confusion they may feel, so that even though we may not have airtight solutions to their questions, they know that they are not alone on the journey, and we believe in them. We will support them. We want the best for them, and we'll love them, regardless of how bumpy the journey is. But through that connected relationship, I am going to be with you. I'm not leaving you. I'm not telling you who you are, but I'm loving and supporting you on the journey towards discovering who God has made you to be. Young people need this. So that's looking at identity. The next one I think we need to look at is grace. There are many situations where we're experiencing responses, feedback, opinions, and behavior which we see as problematic and completely intentional, and we need to see, especially in the tech and marketing space, especially marketing of tech and other addiction creating activities, if you will, that it's not us versus our kids. Often our kids are up against large-scale marketing campaigns to normalize things that really don't have their best interests at heart. And we often think of it being them versus us, and it's not. I think a lot of the time it's them versus things that are much more powerful than them, who are trying to push a particular message towards them. So it's not really them versus us, it's them versus something much bigger. And we need to support and at times be gracious towards behavior and responses which we may feel in the moment need pressure and a rigid response. I would suggest perhaps pause and look at how can we be gracious in this moment, given the context that they're growing up in. Perhaps we need to extend grace as they're often doing the best that they can with the tools at their disposal, in an environment that is often filled with many loud, colorful, and powerful voices. I am giving you a hard time is not the same as I am having a hard time. And sometimes I think we need to understand which is it, because the behavior might be the same, what we're seeing might be the same. So they would be better served, I think, sometimes through our support and our guidance than our often quick-tempered judgment. No matter how formulated and deserving we might think it is, they're growing up in a world that we never had to, and they're battling currents and pressures never seen before. We may be needing to take a few more breaths before we speak. We may need to offer ourselves a little extra grace when we feel we are overwhelmed. So we can offer it to young people. One of the nice ways to look at it is we need to share our calm as adults, or as people leading them, rather than share in their storm. We're dealing with kids and they need our presence. Rather rather than our judgment. They need our presence on the journey. They need us to be close. Proximity is important. We need to coach them from close, not from afar. I often get this picture of Jesus when I think of coaching, and Jesus and his disciples, and he was next to them. He was in the boat. He was to the left, to the right. He was in front of them. He was close by. He wasn't standing on the riverbank shouting at them, judging them for being afraid of the storm and not having enough faith. He was with them. Grace will look different in different settings, but it is a contact sport. Connection is key. Staying attuned to the needs of those in our care and being gracious towards them and ourselves when we don't show up like we should. I think that can be important. So identity and grace, I think, are two key areas. Another key area is this idea of purpose. In a world with so many options, perhaps it feels like there are none. Who are they? What can they do? Where can they go? What value can they offer? Who have they been called to be? And what have they been designed to do? There's a book called Essentialism, not as I understand it, a biblically based book or written by, for what I know, a Christian author, Greg McKeown. It's called Essentialism, the Disciplined Pursuit of Less. And there are 3 questions in this book that I think they're such good questions. And I could, even in my own mind, an own relationship with Jesus, hear him asking me these questions. And I think when we're dealing with purpose, they are very good questions. And the questions are, what do I feel deeply inspired by? What am I particularly talented at? And what meets a significant need in the world? What am I particularly talented at? What do I feel deeply inspired by? And what meets a significant need in the world? And those will align with purpose. And I love those things. And I read in Ephesians 2, verses 8 to 10, and Paul's writing there. He says, God saved you by his grace when you believed. And you can't take credit for that. It's a gift from God. Salvation is not a reward for the good things we have done, so none of us can boast about it. And this is where it's so fascinating at verse 10. For we are God's masterpiece. He has created us anew in Christ Jesus so we can do the good things he planned for us long ago. And this idea that we are his masterpieces has always been something that I love. I recently did a talk with a group of teenagers, and I shared this message, and I love speaking these words into their lives. It invokes a sense of value. It invokes a sense of care or love or destiny or of value. Not just that you were created or something, not just that you were chiseled and you're another widget, but that the master craftsman took great care in forming you. And he deemed you important enough to pour out his great skill as a master craftsman, to craft you, to do a great work that only you can do. And I think that's such a beautiful picture, just to continually allow to wash over young people, especially in the context of helping them understand their purpose. When we call out purpose, or we speak to the greater things that have been set before young people, in this crazy world, in this world where things are often confusing and the messages are distorted and all over the place, but when we call out the great things that are set before them, we help to gently lift their gaze. And we help to gently lift their gaze above what they see now. And it's even more so a powerful picture when you think of their gaze often being down here on a tablet or a screen or something here. But when we call out this purpose, we're having the opportunity to lift their gaze above what's in front of them. And and help them see what's been set before them, the things that they can do. And then through relationship, commit to move towards that thing. This is a powerful message. And when we take this posture, we get to speak into their lives with a weight that other voices don't have. Yes, they are there. Yes, they are loud. Yes, they are colorful. Yes, they are drip feeding all day. But when you can speak such purpose, when you can say, hey, the God of the universe, let's get on board with the God of the universe that has created you. Oh, and by the way, you're a masterpiece. And oh, by the way, that master who created a masterpiece has created masterpiece fitting acts that only you can complete. Hey, lift up your gaze, and I'm going to support you and encourage you in pursuing those things. That speaks purpose. That allows young people and I think empowers them and excites them more so than anything else, and especially when it's done in the context of the supportive, connected relationships. I think that is powerful in terms of how do we reach them. The last one, so we looked at identity, we looked at grace, we looked at purpose. The last one, I think, is this idea of influence. In a world where we often feel out of control, we scramble to regain this mythical unicorn of control, especially when it comes to our kids or the kids in our space. And control's it's not now and never really was ours to yield and wield. Control speaks of power over another. It speaks of subservience, where one is less than the other. What we really should be pushing for in a world of many, often conflicting voices is influence. Are we connected enough to the young people in our presence so that my guidance, my leadership, and my support, and eventually my influence, will navigate them through the rough seas with the strength and certainty unmatched by any wave their lives may encounter? And I want to repeat that, because I think it's so important when it comes to influence and connection. We didn't have control. We don't have control in our lives. We think we do, but we don't. What's up for grabs is influence. So I want you to ask yourself, the people in your space, are you connected enough to those young people in your space? Are you connected enough to those people so that your guidance, your leadership, your support, your influence will navigate them through the rough seas they're experiencing with strength and certainty that will be unmatched by the waves that they may encounter? Are you connected enough? If we are intending to reach kids, teenagers, adolescents, we need to remember that we don't exist in a world of control. And I don't think we should. We have at our disposal an invitation to increase our influence in their lives with them. A current term that is often used today is the word influencer, and it essentially means a person who has the ability to affect the opinion of a large pool of people regarding particular topics and who uses that influence. Influencers seem to be the current day signposts for many young people. And if you take a bit of time and you spend some time looking at some of the content of some of these influencers, I think your responses will fluctuate between nausea, doubt, agreement, fits of hysterics, and at times pure terror. My son came to me the other day and he was talking about this I suppose an influencer on YouTube, and he was talking about how this chap was pouring chocolate syrup, just pouring it, and all he was shouting was chocolate syrup, and he was pouring it. He has 2 million subscribers. 2 million people have said, hey, I want you to drip feed into my life. I want you to influence me with something. Annexed to this particular influencer was another chap who was doing something similar, pouring stuff and all the rest of it. This particular person had 13 million subscribers. Not likes, not views, subscribers. People who have willingly chosen to have more of their content downloaded into their lives. And my son said, it's so silly, Dad. Look what this guy does. It's so silly. And he didn't subscribe, but he did watch. And he can sit there going, oh, it's so silly, so silly. But the question I like to ask is, look, it might be entertaining seeing some guy pour out gallons of peanut butter or chocolate sauce for some. But my question is this. I like hamburgers. So if I'm eating a hamburger, I know it tastes nice, I know it has some value in terms of making me feel good, but nutritional, from a from a nutrient perspective, from a fiber perspective, from a just general health perspective, I think we agree that it's classified as junk food. So if I'm eating this junk food, and all the while, whilst I'm chewing and swallowing, in my head I'm going, oh, this is junk food, this is rubbish for me, this is not good for me, I need to eat some good healthy food. The fact that I'm saying those things is going to have no effect on how my body responds to that hamburger. So even if I'm watching, or if I'm one of the 15 million people that are subscribed to these particular people who are pouring stuff out, I can watch it and say it's silly all day. But the influence is there. Just like the hamburger's influence will be there. We are in and have raised our children in a predominantly consumer-based or positioned culture. And they are often not consuming content of value, especially with the advent and increase of handheld devices. We are needing to regain influence in the lives of young people, to help them through an increasingly challenging reality. And this ability will require time and other costs, and it will require ourselves to position ourselves to connect, being seen as people who value relationship over function, being seen as people who are willing to go the distance in relationship and to hold space and believe in these young people around us, in these masterpieces, even as they are unsure of themselves. So we have that there. We have identity, we have grace, we have purpose, and we have understanding the influence that is there and that we can have and we need to pursue. I believe from what I see, if we can support young people in these areas, it will support our desire and efforts to reach them. But connection with them is so key. Connection with them where they are at, holding space with them and seeing the best in them and then calling it out. I believe that will be the starting point in reaching them. Thank you.